Inequality. We know it's a problem in the US, but is it really a problem here in Canada? A recent study asked Canadians what they think the ideal distribution of wealth should be and how it is actually divided. The results from that study are shocking. If we break the total population of Canada down into a representative group of 100 people, the richest on the right, the poorest on the left, here's what it looks like when we distribute the total wealth of all Canadians. That's roughly $8 trillion in 2012, distributed according to how Canadians think wealth should be divided. This looks pretty good. There's a very healthy middle class, with the middle 60% of Canadians owning roughly 60% of the wealth. The richest group here are certainly well off, but they are only about 3 times richer than the poorest Canadians, who still own a significant share of the pie. Now, here's how Canadians think wealth is actually distributed in Canada. In short, a lot more unequal. Canadians think the richest 20% own 10 times the wealth of the poorest. But even here, things are still pretty good. Yes, Canadians believe that the wealthiest 20% own more than half the country's wealth, and think the bottom 20% own only a little more than 5%. But this is still somewhat equal. There's still a sizable middle class, and poorer Canadians have at least some share of the pie. Ideally, Canadians want a more balanced distribution than what they think exists. Even most conservatives chose this fairer distribution. This shows that Canadians understand that wealth is divided unfairly, and that the current system is skewed. But there's something even more disturbing going on. As bad as Canadians think inequality is, the reality is much worse. Let me explain. The most alarming thing about these results is that Canadians vastly underestimate the actual level of wealth inequality in Canada. In 2012, nearly 70% of all wealth belonged to the top 20% of Canadians. The wealth share of the poorest 20%? As you can see, it barely registers on this chart. The reality is that the bottom 20% of Canadians own almost nothing, less than 1% of the country's wealth. And the bottom 10%, they actually have more debt than assets. It's hard to believe. The bottom half of all Canadians, half of the people who, like you, will watch this video, together own less than 6% of the wealth, a far cry from the healthy middle class we keep hearing about. The picture is even worse if you look at financial assets like stocks and bonds. The top 10% hold 60% of financial assets. That's more than the bottom 90% combined. Canada's CEOs make more than 200 times that of their average worker, one of the worst gaps of any advanced country. Perhaps that's why the top 1% likely owns nearly 20% of all wealth. A wealth pile so massive, it does not even fit on this chart. Canada is now a place where the richest 86 families own more than the bottom 11 million people combined. Canada wasn't always this unequal. We got here because of the political choices we've made. Our social spending has been reduced dramatically since the 1980s. That means how you vote actually matters. The good news is that inequality is not inevitable. It's not some natural law. However, inequality in Canada is real, and it is much, much worse than we think it is. But you can help make sure it is an election issue no party can run from. Take action. Go to broadbandinstitute.ca/wealthgap.